why did you endeavor into academia in the UAE?
For me, it started back in 2007, December 2008, during the financial economic crisis. That was the time for me when I was working as a financial consultant over in Chicago for a brokerage firm. You know, a typical finance role, an 8-to-5 job. And it was during that time, just right after December 2008, when I graduated, which probably wasn't the best of times to graduate, but I still ended up getting a job at that point in finance, which again, you would seem that would be a bit hard, but just once I got into finance, I was working for about 6 months. And during that time, I realized that I wanted to do something different. Now, I had already had some teaching experience while I was working as a teaching assistant in Northern Illinois University in Chicago. And an opportunity came up whereby I was able to venture into Oman for about 1 year. And it was meant to be a role where I go in and set up a financing operation at an insurance company and set up their financial records. I decided, why not? So moved over to Oman. The idea was to get back to the States. And now Dubai was not in the picture. However, I ended up going on a couple of training trips to Dubai, whereby our company was liaising with a lot of different universities. And one thing led to another. I ended up just staying in touch with a lot of those academics while in Oman. And I thought to myself, well, this is the challenge that I was waiting for. I always wanted to be in a role where I'm exposed to different learners, different environments. And I've always been comfortable with the North American environment. To me, this was something that I was waiting for. I wanted to be in front of an audience that had an entirely different mindset than mine, had entirely different belief system, attitudes, and all that. And I decided, why not? Where else can I get this opportunity other than in a metropolitan environment like Dubai? So I went in, and I still remember my first day in a classroom where I was in front of a group of students that were looking at me, and I was looking at them, and we were both trying to figure out where this is going to go. And that was the beginning of an interesting journey that ended up me staying in Dubai for about 9 years. So now I'm back in Toronto, but one of the reasons why I ventured into academia, if someone asks me, the primary reason was to be in an environment, I know it sounds cliche, but being in an environment where I'm not just a lecturer, I'm also a learner myself.
You were actually born in Oman, weren't you?
Yes, I was born in Oman. That is correct. I was born in Oman, migrated to the States when I was young, and I have been around. So there was always this sense of feeling that I would end up going back to Oman for a bit and then come back.
Awesome. Thank you. Kasiana.
I became a US citizen in 2015, and I knew that I wanted to have another international experience. I am a European who immigrated to the United States, and that offered a lot of growth and boost into my professional life and also my personal life. And I knew that having another international experience, kind of as Shamik said, like someone with a different mindset, different values than my belief system, will definitely help me. So since 2015, after I became a US citizen, I started applying for different programs and different opportunities and jobs around the world. And I didn't actually choose academia as a field. It was mostly like academia chose me. I mostly wanted to do research, but it just kind of happened that I started teaching, and I truly enjoy it. And I started teaching at Washington State University and now at Maricopa Community Colleges, and I ended up back at Maricopa. So in 2016, I was at the crossroad between my acceptance as a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal, as a small business advisor in Dakar, or I had the option to move to the United Arab Emirates and teach at the American University in the Emirates. And I decided to choose UAE, and also because since 2011, I had a big interest in the Middle East and Islam as a religion. I also choose that because of the tax-free option of salary and being a Peace Corps volunteer. But I do think that was like the second thing. I choose it almost blindly. Like I didn't really have any connection to the Middle East. I wasn't really aware of the benefits that I had of being in academia in the UAE. So this talk really made me reflect. And I actually came up with 5 reasons and benefits that I had being in academia in the UAE. So number one was the location. UAE is between three continents, really kind of in the middle. If any of you know the picture of Jerusalem from the 1500s, like it's this leaf, and it shows kind of is the center of the world. I'm not saying UAE is the center of the world, but that's kind of what it represents for me. It was like a super 2 to 5 hour flight to Europe, 2 to 5 hours flight to East Africa, West Africa, Southeast Asia. I felt like it was a great opportunity to kind of travel, and Emirates Airlines were actually located there. So what better way to do it? Number two was moving in the UAE meant that I actually got a glimpse into the Gulf culture, which is a perfect name for this talk, Arabian Gulf Academia, specifically to the Gulf. And I thought I'm only going to be exposed to the Gulf countries, right? I didn't thought I'm going to actually be exposed to all the other Arab countries, like Yemen and Egypt and Morocco and Palestine and Jordan. So besides the Arab culture and the Islam that I was actually exposed, the number three for me was truly a dream come true as an anthropologist, as I was surrounded by a plethora of cultures. I learned about not just the Arab cultures and Islam, but I also learned about Iran and Pakistan and India, and also the connection that Gulf countries had historically and present with their surrounding continents, like Asia and Africa. So number four was at the university that we were teaching, me and Matthew, UE, had around 70% of their students were locals, which was a rare find. If any of you know, I'm sure the panelists know, but only 11% of the UAE population are locals, which means it's extremely rare to actually meet a local. You can see them at the mall maybe, but you don't really talk to them. You don't really interact with them. So I was quite aware now. I'm quite aware that if I would have not been in academia and I would have been in any other field, financial field, or working in an office, I would have not had this exposure to the local culture. So having this exposure actually allowed me to learn insights of the culture politically and socially that we do not read in the newspapers or not even in academic papers. So the number five that I probably is my top is that when I was teaching, I'm an anthropologist and sociologist, which means that I was teaching topics that I was said that I'm not supposed to teach, but that was like half of my curriculum was about that. So we were talking about politics, about government, about family, marriage, and gender. So every time when we talked about this, it was such an intriguing and interesting conversation with the students and brought so much enlightening in my life. I just hope that as much as they offer me, I hope I also offer something to them, a different exposure to different cultures. I didn't just come with an American cultural background, but I came with a European background and also with a lot of traveling behind me.
How would you compare your educational experience in UAE to any other location?
I was born and raised in the UAE in the city Dubai. And I went to public school and I went to private school. And after graduating high school in the UAE, I went to the UK, well, to Canada first. And then I switched to the UK and studied law. And now I practice as a lawyer. And so just now that I've gone through all of that, reflecting on my education, I realized that historically there's been such a strong focus on rewarding students for doing well in standardized testing, learning how to do standardized testing and test well, and memorization. And it wasn't until I went to university in the UK and in Canada where I realized, the idea of critically thinking in an academic setting where you're assessed on it was something that I wasn't equipped to do. The UAE education since has moved on, but I won't go much into that because question 4 deals with the areas of growth and opportunity and challenges in the UAE. So I'll touch more upon that there. But when I was in high school and just studying, that was something I noticed as the key difference, the strong focus on standardized testing.
kind of interesting that you mentioned this, because my answer is kind of threefold, and one of those points is that if you plan to go to the Middle East to study, that's one of the adjustments that you'd make, and that would be, professors know exactly what they want as the correct answer. And here in the United States, haven't studied in Canada, but they're more open to you expressing your correct answer, what you think is correct. So that's one of the comparisons I will make. And then moving a little away from just simply education, because when you're going there, you're not only just studying, you're also it's an experience altogether. So you're making new friends, you're exploring the city, the country, or if you choose to travel beyond the country you're in. So two more things. One, you're going to find clusters of people. So you'll find clusters where people are mixing culturally. So you'll have friend groups that are from all sorts of cultures. And then you'll also find clusters that are specific to cultures. For example, I'm Pakistani. So there's a cluster of Pakistani friends you'd find more often, or Desi, which is Pakistani, Indian, and so on. So I would say, if you can get into and make friends with all the clusters, you'll learn a lot, because you'll pick up on the culture and you're going to find all the differences and similarities. I think there are more similarities across the globe than there are differences. That's what I think, because if you really go to the root of it. So that's another comparison I'd make. And that's something you wouldn't find as much in the United States as you would obviously in Dubai, or surrounding countries, simply because everyone's migrating there. Everyone's employed there for a period of time, so there's a lot of mixed cultures coming in. And then the last bit is, in the United States, like for example, if you're in a specific state, you're going to find very similar things to do within that location. With UAE specifically, you have a lot of different things to do. So when you're in Dubai or one of those countries, you can actually go ahead and explore. I like to put it as, there are parts of, I'd find parts of Europe, parts of America, parts of everything in UAE. So kind of explore that. That's one big comparison I'd make, that you can explore a lot of things and get the basic idea and the feel of different parts of the world. And that's how I've seen it. But those are the three main points.
It's funny you say that, Mahan, talking about having different friends group from different places. And, I think I didn't even register that, because just growing up in Dubai, if I look at my friend group, they are from all over the world, different religions, different cultures, different backgrounds. And it's just so normal in the UAE that you can stick to your cluster, or you can branch out. And yeah, that is something that is definitely really great, that I think people don't really appreciate as much. That I think, like Cassiana said, it's 2 hours from all these different places, that it does attract people from a lot of different places, and the economic opportunity incentivizes people. So you do end up going to class with people from Sri Lanka, people from the US, people from all these different places. And as a result, you kind of bond based on your human connection rather than your cultural connection.
Exactly. And you find all those similarities and personalities and across culture. That's what I truly enjoy.
What are the biggest challenges and opportunities for education in the UAE?
I think in terms of the growth and the opportunity, first of all, I mean, the UAE is only 50 years old, so it's still such a young country. And so the opportunity for the education systems to grow and develop, and to learn from professors from different places and different education styles, is something that's really possible. And just seeing how education has changed from when I was in high school until now, like my sister is 9 years younger than me, seeing the education system she went through in Dubai is very different in a good way, where she all of a sudden got exposure to different curriculums, to different educational systems, whether it was the British system or the US, or and so on. And I think in that sense, it just shows how even just within 9 years, it can change so much, and it's continually adapting. So that's one real benefit and opportunity. Another, because it's income tax free, it's something that allows, and the salaries you get, people will think Dubai is expensive, but the fact is the salaries you get will account for that. That's just like if you live, New York, your salary will very likely be, well, hopefully will be higher than if you live in somewhere where the cost of living is a lot less. I think Dubai tries to do that to the extent possible so you can have a good standard of living. And so a lot of young professionals start their career out, and Dubai is really attractive to them. And again, it benefits us because we're getting all this young talent, these people who are still not jaded by whatever industry they're in. They're still passionate about it. And especially in education, again, I have no teaching background, no education, no study in how education systems work, but I am someone who was a student, and I've seen the benefits of being taught by people passionate about what they do, or even administrators passionate about what they do. And so if we can attract that talent, that's what's going to help the students, and that's what's going to help education systems in the UAE overall grow. In terms of a challenge, I think, and I honestly don't really know how to solve this one other than to tell people, other than to hold forums like this and to talk more openly about the UAE and have people go experience it for themselves. Because I think the biggest challenge is whenever the UAE does make international headlines, there's often a tendency by bigger international media sources to talk about the issue, but then also to highlight perhaps some problems in the region or issues of contention. Example, they'll raise the Qatar issue, or there'll be issues of women's rights. And again, we have 3 to 5 minutes to talk, so I'm not gonna give any of those topics the attention they deserve right now, so I won't dive into them. But I mention it because I think when young professionals are coming in, especially in something like academia, where you work so hard for so long, and when there's all this tendency to focus on the problem areas of the UAE market and what's happening around the Middle East in a larger context, I think it creates this negative stigma. But and I've heard this from people in academia, that if you're someone with integrity and you care for freedom and equality, and going to the UAE is something you would just do, you'd put them aside and you just go for money. And I think that's a really unfair stigma. And it puts the UAE at such a disadvantage, because then these really passionate people who can truly make a difference for such a young country are being deterred from going to the UAE, from seeing the opportunities there for their own growth and to inspire the population there. So I don't know what the solution is, but I think there needs to be more discussions about the UAE, about our culture, about the diversity, just like Mahin was talking about, and the really great opportunities that, and learning experience on both sides that can happen. So I feel like that's the biggest hurdle the UAE has to face when trying to expand and continue to grow its educational systems.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, Alan, you're up.
All of you attending have your own unique identities and all your own backgrounds, and that won't change when you go to the UAE or any different international context. So the UAE does have racism, it does have sexism, it does have patriarchal systems still at hand, and there's bigotry, there's discrimination. So one of the biggest challenges is, how is a young country going to operate within those, but hopefully get rid of those systems and become a country that can get rid of some of these systems that plague other countries. But I kind of want to shift the question to think about, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities for you while looking for jobs there? So the biggest challenge, as someone who's from a working class background, from a first generation family, of how did I find these jobs in the UAE? There's a barrier there. So the opportunity for you is, if you get these, you're gonna get a great global lifestyle, you're getting exposed to diversity on an unprecedented level. But the challenge is getting, your foot through the door. So you have, a dozen or so panelists today that hopefully you can reach out to if you're thinking about opportunities in education or broader within the UAE, of helping make sense of that challenge. So the UAE has a lot of challenges that we can get really nitty and gritty and dirty about, but there's also challenges for yourself of thinking about how can we get to the UAE for those opportunities for you to reap the benefits of personally, professionally, and academically.
In 2015, the UAE embarked on a partnership with Stanford University, through which Stanford developed kind of like a core but modular curriculum about innovation and entrepreneurship. And so what they did from 2015 to 2018 is for each year, for a week in the summer, they selected 30 faculty from different universities across UAE. And so Kassiana and I were actually both selected for the third and final cohort, really kind of, focused my mindset into that space. And even in some of the other courses I was teaching, it really sort of infiltrated. Because of that, I'm actually now the director of something called the Each One Teach One Entrepreneurship Institute here. And we primarily focus on giving underrepresented youth, like high school age, education, opportunity to really kind of forge a new path and realize there are doors that can be opened or that they can open that they might not even realize were unlocked. So it's kind of interesting to see this progression of things and connecting dots. So I don't know if Kassiani wanted to speak to your experience at Stanford and how it might have impacted in your area that you were teaching when you came back to UAE.
The program actually started in March that year, and it went for like almost a year because we connected to the other cohorts. We went to Abu Dhabi. We continue to keep in touch with the other, like our cohort and other ones, and make sure that we don't forget what we learn and we implement what we learn. But for me, I use some of the exercises in my own classes, and that still work. It's design thinking, and that for me was a really eye-opening opportunity.
Initially, it started in the college level, and every college was required to have an innovation and entrepreneurship course. And so they really want to kind of give people the education and the initiative to start their own businesses, to do something that doesn't require them to rely on the government to fund it. So.
Besides the tax incentives and the lifestyle incentives to move to Dubai and the UAE as a whole, I think you talk about, being entrepreneurial, Matt. I think that is something that, especially for a professional, whether it doesn't matter if you're young or old or whatever, but that's passionate about what they're doing in education, I would hope they would appreciate that there is capital that can be invested in people, in programs, and you can be part of this young country that wants to develop. It does have its own problems, of course. And you do to an extent need to understand the culture to learn how to work within it and how best to try to implement changes that you think will help the next generation. But yeah, I think it's, I would hope, at least as a UAE national, that people would see the real opportunity of, coming in and shaping this new young country and, empowering the younger people, like the next leaders of that generation.
Who should go overseas? Just in general, not necessarily to UAE.
I would encourage everyone to go abroad, especially while you're young and you might not have as many ties to wherever that might be. And there's a lot of privilege within saying that. Global education opportunities are hard to gain access to. You often have to have the social capita to learn how to find those, but then you also have to have economic capital to, fund you going to study abroad or even just getting you to where you might need to go work. So I encourage everyone to do it. But with saying that, I recognize there's a lot of privilege in saying it's a hard path to go down if it's unfamiliar to you. And again, I want to reiterate, if any of you have interest in finding jobs abroad or studying abroad, please reach out to me specifically or reach out to any of the panelists. I'm going to put them up on the stake too for that, because we're all educationalists on some level right now, giving our knowledge forward. So I would encourage everyone, with the caveat of also thinking about maybe your identity hasn't also always been represented in global education pop-in circles, and what can you bring to those conversations? So I think in the US particularly, we often have an image of who studies abroad, and we know that the research on it tends to be white middle-class individuals who study abroad. So let's think about how can we expand this discussion, and you might be the individual to do that. So I encourage everyone, especially if you might come from an underrepresented background within terms of global education?
Someone who wants to be exposed to, just like a lot of the panelists said, a lot of different dimensions. So if you want to really look at this globe from a bird's eye view, you know, a lot of times we look at a certain situation or we look at a certain circumstance. And, in terms of when I was dealing with students, oftentimes there were issues that any educator can face, right? Where there's plagiarism or where there's other cases. And I often used to have a conversation with these students. Some of them are just being cheeky, just trying to get away with whatever they can, just like you mentioned about the memorization. And some of them had some interesting views that I didn't agree with about why plagiarism is okay, but I was able to understand where they're coming from and communicate to them what we feel that might not be the best way to go about it. So for some students, plagiarism was not about ethics. In fact, to the contrary, they thought they were helping out someone. So they thought that teamwork is what they were trying to do. But I told them that that's probably not the best way to go about it, because you're not really helping them. You might be helping them in the short run, but not in the long run. So someone who wants to be able to look at any particular issue in this world and see it from an entirely different view, and you cannot, it's very hard to do that when you're in a certain comfort zone. So get yourself outside the comfort zone. I'm not saying make yourself extremely uncomfortable. You want to be able to be in a situation, and even that a lot of people do that, and that's admirable, where they go into a grassroots level in a different country and they contribute to that. So if you would like to discover who you really are, go out there. You'd be surprised, and look at what the media is saying about every situation, and then bring that critical mindset to your own thinking process as well. Because at the end of the day, it really makes a difference in terms of whether you are being trained on how to think or what to think. And the best way to do that is to go out there yourselves, is to put yourself in those situations where you can see that, hey, okay, this is an uncomfortable situation for me, but it will really tell you more about who you are. You will discover a different version of yourself when you're in a difficult situation or when you're in different environment overseas, because you will be with students that are of different mindsets. And that is a good thing. You should be in that situation. You should be able to have that conversation as educators. That's what we're trying to do, is have those discussions, even if they're uncomfortable. That's the most learning is actually done from uncomfortable discussions. So someone who is not just the cliched getting out of your comfort zone, that's true, but also if you like to really learn a lot about yourself, go out there and experience that. So that would be my piece of advice to anyone that would like to engage in education overseas, and I would definitely recommend.
If you know what exactly you're trying to learn by going overseas and pursuing education there, go for it. Because there is a potential that you might get overwhelmed, or there's just a lot to experience. So if you know what you want to learn over there, or if you're just comfortable with a lot of experience and just kind of taking it and making sense of it in your own personal way, then go for it. That's my very simple answer, because you're going to learn a lot. Just don't get confused. There's going to be all sorts of different perspectives. So long as you know what you want to learn out of it, go for it.
The answer lies in a type, and that type really lies in not what you have been taught to desire, but in how you have been taught to go about pursuing the things that you desire. What I mean by that is specifically from a behavioral perspective, studying what I do, I can tell you that a lot of our behaviors are shaped by our environments, our social environments, the environments that we've come up in. In short, the way we understand the world, or the world that we know, was developed within the first 5 years of the 4 walls of the house we grew up in. And so if you're not in, and that's a truth across the board. It's why we find ourselves many times addicted to our own thoughts and our own ideas of how the world works. We were taught those things, and we were stewed in those things. And so that's our limitations, and that's really what they become over time. Our limitations in understanding the world as a whole become our our curse and our stumbling blocks more than they do our blessings and stepping stools. Education is like a lantern, and the fact of the matter is you can't see without it. You can't discover any new oceans unless you get the courage to lose sight of the shore first. And so I would encourage those that have the courage to take that jump. First off, that would be one of the first parts of the type of person that should try to pursue something overseas. Now, there's other things. I spoke about your social environment, and there is a value that's added to socially significant behaviors that you will develop as a consequence of being exposed to different areas. I like to say this often, is that exposure creates expectation, and expectation influences behavior, and behavior creates our future. And so it all begins with the things that you are exposed to in life. That is important because, again, thank you so much, because a lot of us are right now, the world is being run by, I can at least speak from my perspective living in the United States, has been run by some people with very small views and understandings of people and different people groups. I just watched a week ago a debate between a European, a Canadian, two Americans speaking about the importance of people groups. And one was debating, one side debating how we don't need them, how it's not important, and the others why it is, which was fascinating to me that that's something to debate. Whereas if you were in a room with someone from a different culture, let's say if you were in a room with someone who grew up in a Jewish background, would you be so quick to offer them something that was not kosher? Would you even know? Or offer them something kosher, would you even know the difference had you not been exposed? Again, so it goes to exposure. Here's another thing to think of, I think should be considered, is I have a background in finance. I have about 13, 15 years in finance. And to understand the markets from a different perspective, when you're looking at, let's say, if you're just wanting to invest, if you're wanting to look into in the investment market, and you want to, and you have a good understanding of how culture affects different markets, because anything that's purchased across the world is purchased by a type of thinking, a type of belief system. It's represented through cultures. So the way we think, the way we believe, those cultures influence and they affect the way markets move. This could affect your success even in finance. It could affect your success in business. Just exposing yourself to something outside of what you've known for your whole life. So again, it would come to having the courage to do that. And, it seems scary. I'm not going to say that it's not. You a lot of times are in a new place that you haven't been exposed to. You don't know many people. You may not be the type to walk up and shake a person's hand, and you run into that issue, an old adage that says, the trouble with having an open mind, of course, is that people are always insistent on putting something in it. But if you are willing to take that risk, I believe, and I have actually learned for myself, that what happens is an expansion more than a mitigation of your ideas and the way that you understand how things work. And that expansion helps to influence not just your world, but the world around you, others that are in your world, some that you may and may not meet. I'm an African-American man that lives in the United States, and a lot of people that find themselves in my same group do not have the exposure, do not have opportunities towards the exposure, don't have the resources, and or they just don't know how to get access to these opportunities. And so again, and for the sake of being courageous, sometimes just standing and being a visual example and representation of someone who did can help to give another person the mindset that it's possible, and the exposure that could change their life and the lives of others. So I just wanted to be sure to say that as well. That's super important. It's a way that you can be able to give without even trying to, just giving by stepping out and learning more. Forums like these are what help to expand understanding of what's important and what's worth pursuing. If nothing else, we are in school not simply, someone said it earlier, not simply to learn how to test. I believe it was Sarah that spoke about it, learn how to test and memorize things, but more importantly, to learn and understand how to think. And exposing yourselves to as many different stimuli as possible can help to enhance your ability to think critically, and to think in a way that's measurably significant in this world. So that can and more than likely will be a direct result of forums like this. So thank you again for putting this together. It's helped to, I know, equate to some change. I know that it is, and I know that it will.